Hi, I'm Joan Newcomb, and today's Mystic Minute is Me Too, Anthony Robbins, and consciousness. So Anthony Robbins got kind of nailed on a presentation he did recently. He was talking about the Me Too movement, and now I've forgotten the exact details of it, but it was a misinterpretation. And a lovely woman stood up in the audience and basically said he was doing a disservice and that he didn't understand it. And he clearly didn't understand. And it was interesting, his response, because he's a large guy, and he has made his living being a very forceful personality. And so the forceful personality was trying to be right. And it so clearly illustrated where he wasn't. So how to summarize all this and then give a bigger perspective of consciousness? Because the Me Too movement is everybody who's ever been abused is finally being able to stand up and give a voice to it and be heard. And there's more hashtags to this now that are coming to my mind about, kind of for this kind of stuff to stop. And it's an amazing time, and this has all happened in a relatively short period of time as well, that it's come to the surface and reversed. Even a year ago, people weren't being heard, people were being dismissed. So what's going on from the perspective of consciousness is that we are seeing a shift in the old paradigm of power. So the old paradigm was power outside and being dominant. So being dominant and strong, which also meant being more powerful than anyone else and dominating the field and winning, and all of those very masculine ways of being in the world. All of that is disintegrating now, because in reality, from the perspective of consciousness, that's not powerful at all. Power outside is not powerful. It's power inside, it's empowerment. And it has nothing to do with anybody else's power. Nobody is more powerful than you within your space. No one's more powerful than me within my space. So it's not about dominance. It's not about being more powerful. It's about each of us feeling empowered. And it's a whole new way of understanding and being in the world. So it's a very exciting time to watch this happening around the world. Is people are rising up against injustice. And yes, there's been revolutions and people rising up against injustice since the beginning of time. And right now, it's exciting because there's a collective support. And it feels more like this is coming more into form. So what's on the way out is all that old paradigm way of being powerful that isn't powerful, and by, bullying people, belittling people, that whole, someone has to be less than in order for you to be more than. And we're seeing that all reflected in the world, and it's being exposed and in the process of disintegrating. So I can see where this can come to a resolution that doesn't have to be taking people down. What is really being taken down and what is really toppling is that old paradigm. And if someone is clinging to that identity so strongly, then they will be toppled because the identity is being toppled. And the people who will survive out of this are the ones who can let go of that identity and transform. It's a pretty amazing time for me because, I grew up in that old paradigm, and I grew up in a very male-dominated household with a very strong personality who was abusive from our way of interpreting it now. Wasn't considered abusive then. I mean, hitting your kids spontaneously and without warning was normal. My brothers never knew what mood my father was going to be in when he came into the house, so they would scatter and hide. And he also abused with words, and that's the trickier thing because emotional abuse is invisible, so it's harder to validate. But verbally berating someone, calling them names, stupid, selfish, self-centered, whatever, that really sinks into your sense of self, your identity, your soul. And it's much harder to recover from. And I didn't even realize that I grew up in a household of domestic violence until many, many years later when I was a professional coach and was part of a project working with women from the local domestic violence survivors group. And I was working with 3 women there and reading the book that they were using in their group, which was Why Does He Do That? And I remember thinking that I had an background with working with families of alcoholics, but I didn't know about families of abuse. And for some reason, I thought they would be like my mother. Now, why would I think they'd be like my mother? But I thought they'd be like my mother. And I'm reading their book, and I'm working with the women, none of whom had been hit, but they'd all been emotionally abused. And I'm reading the book. I'm recognizing my father in it, and I'm realizing they're like me. So how do you reconcile that? How do you call someone on their behavior? I never did, actually. I actually was able to come to a point of releasing that so that I was able to go back east and help him pass. And after he died, all of the lies and the half-truths that he spread throughout the family came to the surface. So most of what I encounter nowadays are the after effects of that behavior. Because psychological abuse is a pretty amazing thing. You can say a half-truth about someone and suddenly you have a picture about that person that isn't true. So this isn't meant to be a whole conversation about abuse, but more of an overview of the experience of consciousness coming into form. Greater consciousness is light coming into form, and what it is shining a light on is all the darkness within, all the distortions within, all the restrictions and limitations, and opposite of consciousness, opposite of the truth of who you are, who we all really are, which is consciousness. At our essence, we are infinitely powerful, infinitely good, true, light, all of those things. And what's being exposed is everything that isn't. And so many of us are afraid of our own power because our experience of it is dominance and hurting people. And that's not what real power is. That's not what real power does. Real power empowers. Real power illuminates. the truth is not something to be feared. Usually when the truth shows up, it's a relief. So I'm excited to see how this is all going to unfold. We're not in the reconciliation part of it yet. We're still in the things coming to the surface, the truth being exposed. And what's reflecting out in the world today is all those stories of things being exposed. But just to let you know, there is a reconciliation process, whether or not that individual reconciles with you or that individual recognizes their abusive behavior. There's more of a collective exposure and reconciliation coming. So no matter how terrible it seems right now and how awful the news is and how horrible or whatever is coming up, just know it's in the process of getting better. The light is shining and it is exposing, but it is also bringing warmth. It's bringing empowerment and it's bringing change. So if you like these videos, you can subscribe to them on YouTube. If you'd like to know more, my website is joan-newcomb.com. I have a weekly radio show and podcast. I write a weekly blog and newsletter. I do meetups around the Puget Sound. I also do monthly webinars. And if you want to know more about how to navigate your life as consciousness in this time of change, go to my website, joan-newcomb.com, and look at my coaching programs. So go to joan-newcomb.com, and I'll see you in another couple days with another Mystic Minute.